Alright, thanks for coming back to Shooting It Straight and to the second half of our discussion of Glock diagnosis and troubleshooting with the 10 most common stoppages or issues encountered. Now, we saw that the first 5 issues were generally directly related to some type of owner or user negligence or manipulation. So let's see if the remaining 5 will show the same thing. Now this half is going to be just a little more technical, so I had to get prepared for that. All right, we're going to discuss BTF, brass tooth face, or officially known as erratic ejection. Okay, it's not a sexual thing. Now this can be caused from a defective extractor, all right, or a defective ejector. All right, so check those 2 components for defects, and also check the serial number stamped on that ejector. You'll find that serial number, that number, a product number, right there. Check and make sure that that is the correct ejector for your particular gun, because that does make a difference. The angle in which this is filed is different on some of them depending on caliber. The length is different, and the contact point where it contacts the back of the case here, that makes a difference. Okay, now if it's correct, then check the angle on the face of that ejector right there. Okay, because that angle can determine how that case is deflected. All right, now let me try to. Now at this point, you can either replace the ejector altogether, because this is removable. You just pull it straight out and put a new one in. Okay, you can either replace the extractor or the ejector, which is a better choice, or you can lightly file the angle on it. But I'll caution you on that. You better damn well know what you're doing before you start changing any angles on anything. If you've never done that before, the best thing to do is just get another ejector and pop it in. It's the quickest, easiest way to do things. Okay? Or, the erratic ejection can be caused by using the incorrect spring-loaded bearing. Okay, this is your extractor depressor plunger, and it goes right in here, and you'll see this tip right here nest up against the rear of this extractor, and it's designed to do that because it's pushing on the back of that extractor to give it tension. Can you see that now? How much tension is back there matters, and that is determined by the spring-loaded bearing. All right, you could have the wrong caliber. These things, these little plastic spring-loaded bearings in here, and they are removable. The spring comes off and the spring-loaded bearing comes off. They are color-coded for caliber, okay? White is for 357 SIG and 40 caliber. Green is for 45 and 10 millimeter. And black is for the 9 millimeters and I think 380s as well. So they are color-coded. They have to match your caliber, because they are different lengths. The overall length of them is different, especially right here at the shoulders. The height is different, and that difference determines how much pressure or tension is put on that extractor. Alright, so check that. Also, and this might get a little complicated, you'll have to make sure that this spring-loaded bearing correlates with what type of extractor you have. There's two types, an LCI or non-LCI. LCI stands for loaded chamber indicator. Okay, this one is a loaded chamber indicator. You can tell by the notch right here. A non-LCI, or one that is not a loaded chamber indicator extractor, will just be flat and smooth all the way across. You can't get an LCI and then put a non-LCI bearing, spring-loaded bearing on here. It's not going to work. It's going to throw things off because these things are cut different. Their angles are different in here. So the tension and all that is different. So you have to check that out and make sure they match. Alright, so that's your erratic ejection. Now that's not saying all of your groups, all the empty brass needs to land in one little spot like that in the exact same area every time you shoot. That's not going to happen. But you don't want it flying. You don't want brass flying all over the damn place in all kinds of weird directions every time you shoot. That's far too erratic. You don't want to pelt your buddy with it. You don't want to pelt yourself with brass. You know. So it makes a difference. It matters. Now let's look at trigger reset and the trigger failing to go fully forward. Okay. That trigger has to go fully forward before you fire. Every time you fire, that trigger has to go fully forward, so that safety leaf in the trigger, the safety leaf block back here, can actually come in contact with the frame and engage that trigger safety like it's designed to do. Sometimes that trigger won't do that. It won't go forward. Now the biggest culprit of the trigger system, meaning the connector and the trigger bar section, the biggest culprit of that failing to reset is aftermarket trigger systems and or aftermarket light springs, which is exactly why I never have and never will recommend these modifications like that. Now it may be beneficial for competitive shooters, but my channel is for defensive shooters, not competitive shooters. But outside of that, outside of aftermarket triggers, it could also be altered, bent, or deformed trigger bar. Maybe somehow it's altered or bent. It could be the connector, the angle in relation to the trigger bar or to the trigger housing assembly. Maybe you've pushed on it in the wrong place and changed that degree of angle on that connector. That could cause it. Or the connector itself could just be loose in the housing. Or also it could be, debris or heavy fouling, could have gotten in there and mucked up the works. So clean it and examine it, check the angle. Now if the trigger itself fails to return to the fully forward position like it's supposed to, it's usually going to be due to a weak or a light aftermarket firing pin spring. That's why I say stay away from that stuff. Leave the internals alone. It could also be a heavily fouled firing pin channel or a damaged channel liner in here. Down in here, there's two liners. There's a sleeve, and there's another one in there that's not designed to come out. You have to manually pull that out if you need to change it. Now, another common cause of this problem lies with the trigger spring being improperly positioned. Now, you can't see it, well, you can barely see it right here. Trigger spring right back here, right behind that cruciform, right behind the sear of the cruciform right there. That's the trigger spring. I keep spare parts for all of my guns, springs and all of that stuff, because I lose them, you know. Now look, where did my, if the top loop of that, of this spring is offset to the side of that cruciform leg that drops down where that little hole is that you're supposed to snap this onto, right? And it's supposed to be in the S configuration. If you stand it up vertically, it's supposed to be in the S configuration. If that loop up here is off to the side of that cruciform leg and not centered, it will cause that problem. Issues with the trigger like this are so common that I am making a specific video in this same series to address these very issues concerning the trigger. So, you know, watch for that. All right. Okay, light primer strikes. If you're having consistent light primer strikes and the strikes appear to be centered, you know, pretty much centered where they're supposed to be, all right, it could be caused by a weak or light firing pin spring, usually an aftermarket spring. It could be defective ammo. It could be ammo for submachine guns, because most of the time submachine gun ammo have harder primers, or some type of obstruction in the firing pin channel, such as oil, CLP, debris, fouling, something like that. Or it could be the firing pin spring cups, those little bastards right there, that I really have a hard time putting these back on. But they come in, they're two halves, right? They're two halves, and they go around they sit on top of the spring here on the firing pin. If you don't get those things just right, and they're offset in height, and you know, it could cause that problem. And now that height offset right there can be caused if the separation point of these cups is right there at the end of the last coil, where that last coil ends, right there. If the separation point of those firing pin cups is resting right above that the end of that last coil cutoff, then it could throw it off kilter, and that could be just enough to make a light primer strike. Doesn't take much at all, millimeters. All right, now if you get light primer strikes and they're off-centered, it could be due to a tight extractor, and that's why I said you have to make sure that your extractor and your extractor depressor plunger and the spring-loaded bearing are all matching. Your slide could have failed to return into full battery, usually due to fouling, or the slide lock may be in the reversed position. The slide lock, not the slide stop, the slide lock, this right here. The reason is because there's a groove right here just on one side of that slide lock. On the other side it's completely smooth, but here is a groove. Well, that groove has to be facing you as it's sitting in your pistol frame. It's got to be facing you. And that is because the barrel, the lugs right here, specifically this notched area right here, catches right in that groove. And this is one of the ways that helps to keep your slide and barrel from, from sliding off like that when you shoot it. So, but if it's turned around, then it's not going to mate up like it should, and it's going to have about 2 millimeters to go. It's going to be about 2 millimeters short before it can go into full lockup. So that's got to be positioned right. Okay? So fellas, in reviewing these top 10 most common issues, I think it's pretty obvious that most can be attributed to the owner or the shooter, okay? Now, as you can see, our grip plays a very large role in these issues, as does keeping our pistol clean. And I've mentioned this numerous times in all of my videos. And the failure to install parts correctly or using certain aftermarket parts also seems to be a frequent culprit in all of this as well. So my inspiration for doing this particular episode was so that you'll have the information to avoid 95% of these issues that we just discussed. Okay? So I hope you found this information useful. Thanks for watching. I'm Antonius, and as usual, I'm just shooting it straight. Ciao.